What looks like blood in there. And
it's not blood, it's deer meat. I had a big bag of, there's a farm around here that does deer meat and hamburgers.
Holy we got a body.
Do it.
Yes, I would like to say something.
Go ahead.
I'm innocent. F you all. You're garbage. That's all you're
On the morning of May 20th, 2022, police in Orono, Minnesota, called over a battered sedan with a shattered rear window and a flat tire. Behind the wheel sat 28-year-old Julissa Thaler. She looked disheveled, distracted, and strangely unconcerned. Officers quickly noticed something off. The interior of the vehicle was littered with random debris, fast food wrappers, a shovel, a saw, and the smell inside was overwhelming. They asked her if she needed help, but Thaler brushed it off, insisting everything was fine. Minutes later, officers made a discovery that would shock not just Minnesota, but the entire country. In the trunk of the car, hidden under blankets and trash, was the heartbreaking evidence that Eli Hart had lost his life. The details of this case are as chilling as they are heartbreaking. Eli was a bright, cheerful first grader who loved buses, fishing trips, and telling stories. He was known in his small community for his kindness and curiosity. But behind the scenes, Eli had been caught in the middle of a bitter custody battle between his parents. His father, Eli Hart, had fought desperately to protect him, warning authorities that Julissa was unstable and dangerous. Reports show that social workers and court officials were repeatedly alerted to concerns about Thaler's mental health and erratic behavior. She had a history of drug use, erratic outbursts, and run-ins with police. Yet despite these red flags, she was awarded custody of Eli just weeks before his death. What happened on that May morning was nothing short of calculated. Evidence later revealed that Thaler had purchased ammunition days earlier. She picked Eli up for what was supposed to be a routine visit. Instead, she drove him around the city before firing 9 rounds into Eli while he sat strapped in his booster seat. The autopsy confirmed multiple gunshot wounds. Even more disturbing, investigators believe Eli remained in the car with her for hours after the attack. After the killing, Thaler attempted to cover her tracks in almost surreal ways. She disposed of the murder weapon in a public trash bin. She drove around town in her bullet-riddled vehicle, window shattered, as though nothing had happened. When police finally stopped her, she lied, saying she had just dropped Eli off. But the evidence in the trunk told the truth. Eli's father later described the discovery as the moment his world collapsed. For years, Tori had warned the courts that Julissa was unfit, filing motions and begging officials to take his concerns seriously. He described his son as his best friend and said that losing him in such a violent, senseless way destroyed not only his life, but his faith in the system. In court, the trial was agonizing. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, ballistic tests, surveillance footage, and testimony from social workers and family members who had raised red flags about Thaler for months. The defense tried to argue mental illness, pointing to Thaler's history of psychiatric issues, but the jury saw through it. The deliberate nature of the killing, the preparation, the ammunition purchase, the attempts to cover it up, painted a picture not of a breakdown, but of cold intent. During sentencing in February 2023, the courtroom was filled with grief and anger. Eli's father gave an emotional statement about the child he lost, describing how his little boy had dreams of growing up to be a bus driver. Prosecutors asked for the maximum sentence allowed by law. The judge agreed, handing Thaler life in prison without the possibility of parole. What made the moment unforgettable and viral across the internet was Thaler's reaction. As the judge read the sentence, she erupted in a bizarre outburst, interrupting him repeatedly. She refused to acknowledge responsibility, refused to show remorse, and lashed out as if she were the victim. The footage spread online, enraging viewers around the world. Today, Julissa Thaler sits in a Minnesota prison cell, serving her life sentence. Eli's name, however, lives on. His father and extended family have spoken publicly about their mission to honor him, calling for reforms in custody cases to ensure that warning signs are not ignored again. For many, what makes this story so horrifying isn't just the murder itself, it's the thought of a system that had every chance to save Eli, but didn't. A child was silenced, a father's pleas were dismissed, and a mother turned into the very monster she was trusted to protect him from. Julissa Thaler will never walk free again. But for Eli's father and for everyone who followed this case, that is a small comfort compared to the loss of a little boy who deserved so much more.
Please come home, Shannon, if you're out there, come home. If anybody's got my daughter, my beautiful princess daughter, please bring her home.
Well, I mean, why did you phone the police when you knew where she was?
Nobody suspected anything.
And how would, by phoning the police, people not suspect you? What did you hope to achieve by that?
On February 19th, 2008, 9-year-old Shannon Matthews disappeared on her way home from school in the small town of Dewsbury, West Yorkshire. She lived just a short walk away, barely half a mile, yet she never arrived. By evening, the alarm was raised. Police were notified, neighbors began knocking on doors, and within hours, the community was out in force with flashlights and posters. A missing child in a quiet English town instantly became front-page news. At the center of it all was Shannon's mother, 32-year-old Karen Matthews. She appeared distraught in front of television cameras, pleading for her daughter's safe return. She sobbed, begged, and told the cameras, "Shannon, we all love you. Please come home." Her interviews were replayed across the country, fueling sympathy and outrage. It seemed like another heartbreaking story of a child snatched by a stranger. The search effort was enormous. Police launched one of the largest manhunts the UK had ever seen. Hundreds of officers were involved, along with volunteers who scoured woods, rivers, and abandoned buildings. Sniffer dogs, helicopters, and heat detection equipment were deployed. Over 1,000 homes were searched. The community, already haunted by the unsolved disappearance of Madeleine McCann the year before, rallied around the Matthews family, determined not to let another child vanish without answers. But as the days stretched into weeks, cracks began to show. Karen's behavior struck detectives as odd. In press conferences, she seemed rehearsed, repeating the same lines, but never truly engaging with questions. She often avoided eye contact and sometimes appeared more interested in the reward money that had ballooned to £50,000 than in her daughter's well-being. Behind closed doors, officers noticed she showed little urgency when asked about new leads. Then, on March 14th, 24 days after Shannon vanished, police received a tip that would unravel everything. They raided the home of Michael Donovan, the uncle of Karen's boyfriend. Inside, in a first-floor flat, less than a mile from Shannon's own home, they found the girl, alive. She was weak, drugged, and terrified. She had been hidden inside the base of a divan bed, restrained and sedated with a cocktail of prescription medications. The discovery shocked the nation. The relief that Shannon was alive quickly gave way to disbelief and rage when the truth emerged. This was not a stranger abduction. It was a staged kidnapping, orchestrated by Shannon's own mother. Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan had devised the plan to cash in on the huge reward fund. The idea was simple and cold. Donovan would hold Shannon captive. Karen would continue her public appeals, and weeks later, Donovan would find Shannon, claiming the reward. The money would be split between them. Investigators revealed chilling details of Shannon's captivity. For nearly a month, she was kept in darkness under Donovan's bed, sedated daily, with drugs including temazepam and travel sickness tablets. Whenever Donovan left the flat, he tied her with a strap to stop her from escaping. Despite her pleas to go home, she was silenced and hidden away, treated not as a daughter, but as a bargaining chip. The public reaction was explosive. The same community that had searched tirelessly for Shannon now felt betrayed and humiliated. Neighbors who had organized vigils and scoured the streets learned they had been used as props in Karen's scheme. Newspapers branded her Britain's worst mother. Protesters gathered outside her home shouting abuse, furious at her callousness. The trial in 2009 exposed every detail of Karen's betrayal. Prosecutors laid out how she had manipulated her community, lied to investigators, and exploited the nation's sympathy for personal gain. Witnesses described her detached demeanor during the search. Phone records and testimony proved she was in constant contact with Donovan while pretending to be a grieving mother. The most damning evidence came from Shannon herself. She told investigators she had been forced to take pills that made her sleepy and had been trapped in the small compartment under the bed. She said Donovan told her she couldn't go home because her mother didn't want her to. That statement alone shattered any remaining doubts about Karen's role. The jury had no hesitation. Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were both convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice. Each received 8 years in prison. Karen served just under half before being released on license in 2012. She entered protective housing under a new identity, but her infamy followed her everywhere. The fallout from the case went beyond just the crime. Shannon was placed under protective custody and given a new identity to shield her from the media and from her mother. To this day, her whereabouts are kept secret. What made the case so shocking wasn't only the crime itself, but the motive. Karen wasn't driven by rage or delusion. She was motivated by greed. She turned her daughter into a prop, exploiting national sympathy for money. And she did it with a shocking lack of maternal instinct, willingly subjecting Shannon to trauma for the sake of a payout. The case also sparked wider debates about class and poverty. Commentators noted how Karen's background and demeanor were portrayed in the media, raising questions about how working-class families are represented in crime coverage. But for the public, those debates were secondary to the sheer outrage that a mother could betray her child in such a calculated way. To this day, Shannon Matthews remains a name that evokes both relief and anger. Relief that she survived, anger that she was ever placed in such danger by the one person who should have loved her most.
Do you regret pulling the trigger and killing them? You don't. Why not?
Oh my, because I saved them.
In January 2011, police in Tampa, Florida, responded to a disturbing welfare call at the home of 50-year-old Julie Schenecker. A relative had called after Julie's mother expressed concern that she hadn't heard from her daughter or grandchildren in days. When officers entered the home, what they found was a scene that stunned even seasoned investigators. Julie was inside, covered in blood, dazed, and unresponsive. Upstairs and in the garage were her two teenage children, 16-year-old Calix and 13-year-old Beau, both dead from gunshot wounds. The crime shocked Florida and the nation. Julie Schenecker was not a stereotypical suspect. She was the wife of a decorated U.S. Army colonel, a stay-at-home mother who lived in a suburban gated community. Outwardly, the family seemed successful, stable, even privileged. But beneath that facade was a woman whose mental health had been deteriorating for years. According to court records, Julie had long struggled with depression and bipolar disorder. She had been hospitalized multiple times for psychiatric episodes and had recently been prescribed medication for her condition. Friends and family said she often seemed withdrawn and erratic, but no one imagined she could become violent. On the morning of January 27th, 2011, Julie drove to a gun shop and purchased a .38 caliber revolver. Just hours later, she picked up Beau from soccer practice. As he sat in the passenger seat, she shot him twice in the head. She then drove home, parked the car in the garage, and left his body inside. She walked upstairs to her daughter's room, where Calix was working on homework. Calix had reportedly been critical of her mother in the days before, describing her as crazy and telling friends she couldn't wait to leave home for college. Julie shot her daughter twice in the head, killing her instantly. She later told police she believed her children were talking back and that she needed to punish them. What made this case particularly chilling was Julie's own account of events. In her taped confession, she told detectives she had planned the killings for days. She admitted she bought the guns specifically to carry them out. She claimed her children were mouthy and disrespectful and that she couldn't tolerate it anymore. Her words revealed not a moment of rage, but a deliberate decision to end their lives. The trial, delayed for years by mental competency evaluations, became a media spectacle. Prosecutors argued that Julie knew exactly what she was doing. They emphasized the planning, the gun purchase, the timing, the deliberate targeting of her children one by one. They painted her as a cold, calculating killer who used mental illness as an excuse. The defense countered with a plea of insanity. They presented medical experts who testified about her bipolar disorder, depression, and history of psychiatric hospitalizations. They argued that Julie was in the grit of a severe mental breakdown, incapable of distinguishing right from wrong. They pointed to her suicide attempts and erratic behavior as evidence of her fragile mental state. But prosecutors dismantled the insanity claim, pointing to her methodical actions. They showed the jury how she calmly purchased the revolver, drove her son home as if nothing was wrong, and carried out the killings without hesitation. They emphasized her confession, where she admitted she planned to kill her children to stop them from talking back. The testimony of Julie's husband, Colonel Parker Schenecker, was one of the most emotional moments of the trial. He had been deployed overseas at the time of the murders and returned home to a nightmare. In court, he described how his wife's betrayal destroyed his life. He called Calix and Beau the pride of my life and said their loss was a wound that will never heal.
The defendant said to me when I saw her, "I guess I stomped your heart flat, huh?"
The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before delivering their verdict in May 2014. Julie Schenecker was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Throughout the trial, Julie showed little visible remorse. At times, she sat motionless, staring into space. At other moments, she appeared frustrated or defiant. To many, her lack of emotion reinforced the image of a cold, detached killer. The case divided public opinion. Some saw Julie as a monster who executed her own children out of selfishness and spite. Others viewed her as a tragic figure, a severely mentally ill woman, failed by a system that did not provide adequate support. But for the jury, the evidence was clear. Today, she remains incarcerated at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida, serving her life sentence. She occasionally files appeals, claiming errors in her trial, but none have succeeded. Parker Schenecker, her ex-husband, has devoted herself to honoring Calix and Beau's memories. He founded a foundation in their names to support youth programs and has spoken publicly about resilience and grief. What makes the Schenecker case so unforgettable is not just the brutality of the act, but the contrast between appearance and reality. A suburban mother in a seemingly stable family turned her home into a crime scene.
We also then began to find out that she had a monster in her life from the age of 9, being shown pornography, being raped. All of those things together made her a broken person.
In 2015, the quiet community of Bellefontaine, Ohio, was shaken by the revelation of a crime so incomprehensible it stunned and even hardened investigators. At the center of it was 23-year-old Brittany Pilkington, a mother who confessed to killing her 3 young sons over the course of 13 months. The Pilkington family lived in a modest apartment, often struggling to make ends meet. Neighbors described them as troubled, but not unusual for the area. Beneath the surface, however, tension simmered. Brittany's marriage to Joseph Pilkington was strained and deeply complicated. Joseph had originally been married to Brittany's mother, before beginning a relationship with Brittany herself, a dynamic that left family members suspicious and resentful. In July 2014, Brittany's 3-month-old son, Niall, was rushed to the hospital, but tragically did not survive. At the time, his death was attributed to sudden infant death syndrome. Investigators noted little that seemed suspicious, and Brittany returned home grieving. Just a few months later, tragedy struck again. In April 2015, 4-year-old Gavin was found unresponsive in his bed. Once again, Brittany was the one who reported finding her child lifeless. The cause of death was not immediately clear, but with a second young child gone, authorities began to question whether something more sinister was unfolding. Then, in August 2015, Brittany's 3-month-old son, Noah, was found dead in similar circumstances. This time, investigators moved quickly. The pattern was undeniable. 3 sons dead in just over a year, while Brittany's surviving daughter remained unharmed. Confronted by detectives, Brittany eventually confessed. She admitted to smothering each of her sons. Her explanation stunned the public. She claimed she acted out of jealousy and resentment, believing her husband favored the boys and neglected their daughter. In her mind, eliminating the boys would even things out and bring her more attention and love. The confession raised disturbing questions about motive, mental health, and the weight of generational dysfunction. Prosecutors argued that Brittany's actions were cold and deliberate. She killed Niall by holding a blanket over his face, then months later did the same to Gavin, and finally to Noah. There was no heat-of-the-moment rage. This was repeated, planned behavior carried out over time. The trial was delayed for years as lawyers debated her mental state. The defense argued she suffered from depression, trauma, and cognitive impairments that left her unable to fully understand her actions. They pointed to her history of abuse, her low IQ, and her troubled relationship with Joseph as evidence that she was not a calculating killer, but a deeply damaged woman. The prosecution countered that her repeated actions proved intent. They emphasized her confession, where she calmly described how she carried out each killing. They also noted that she allowed her daughter to live, targeting only the boys, fitting with her stated motive of jealousy. Initially, prosecutors sought the death penalty, but after years of negotiation, a deal was reached. In 2021, Brittany Pilkington pled guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. In exchange, she was spared the death penalty and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families involved, the damage was irreversible. Joseph Pilkington, who had once defended his wife, later admitted he would never forgive her. Extended relatives described the case as a tragedy built on years of dysfunction, secrecy, and poor oversight by authorities. Many asked why social services hadn't intervened earlier after the first 2 deaths. Brittany Pilkington is now serving her sentence in an Ohio women's prison, where she will remain for the rest of her life. Her daughter, the only surviving child, was placed in protective custody and removed from the environment that had taken her brothers. Even today, debate surrounds her case. Some see her purely as a monster who systematically destroyed her family. Others argue she was a victim of abuse and mental illness, trapped in a toxic marriage and unable to cope. But what cannot be debated are the facts. 3 boys, Niall, Gavin, and Noah, lost their lives at the hands of the one person meant to protect them. On the morning of November 29th, 2014, in the small Sicilian town of Santa Croce Camarina, 8-year-old Loris Stival was reported missing. His mother, 26-year-old Veronica Panarello, told police she had dropped him at school earlier that day, but when teachers checked attendance, Loris had never arrived. A frantic search began immediately. Hundreds of locals joined police in combing the area. By evening, the search ended in tragedy. Loris's body was found in a remote gully just outside of town. His bag and other belongings were scattered nearby. The discovery shattered the community. Santa Croce Camarina was a quiet town, unaccustomed to crime of this scale. The murder of a child stunned Sicily and quickly drew national attention. From the start, investigators noticed that Veronica's story did not add up. She insisted she had driven Loris to school, but surveillance cameras showed no trace of her car that morning. Inconsistencies piled up. Her timeline shifted. Her phone records contradicted her claims, and her demeanor was strangely detached for a grieving mother. Forensic analysis revealed the cause of death: strangulation with electrical cable ties. There were no signs of a random attack or robbery. The evidence pointed inward, toward someone the boy trusted. Within days, suspicion fell squarely on his mother. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Veronica began to change her story. At first, she denied involvement. Later, she claimed that her father-in-law, Andrea Stival, had killed Loris after the boy discovered the two of them in an affair. She said Andrea threatened her into silence and helped dispose of the body. This allegation shocked the Stival family and made headlines across Italy, but investigators found no evidence to support her claim. Andrea had an alibi, and phone records proved he was elsewhere at the time of Loris's death. Witness testimony and forensic evidence all contradicted Veronica's version. The story was seen as a desperate attempt to shift blame, one that further destroyed her credibility. As the investigation unfolded, prosecutors presented a chilling picture of what really happened. On the morning of November 29th, Veronica argued with Loris before strangling him with plastic ties in their family home. She then placed his body in her car, drove to the countryside, and dumped him in the gully. Afterward, she staged the scene to make it appear as though he had disappeared on his way to school. The motive remains one of the most debated aspects of the case. Prosecutors argued that Veronica saw her son as an obstacle, someone who interfered with her freedom and independence. Others suggested she acted in a sudden fit of rage. But the planning, the attempt to cover up the crime, the false accusations against her father-in-law, the repeated lies to police, made it clear this was not an accident. In 2016, after a highly publicized trial, Veronica Panarello was convicted of the murder of her son and of concealing his body. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison, the maximum penalty short of life imprisonment under Italian law. In court, the judge described her as an unscrupulous liar who showed no remorse. Experts debated whether she suffered from a mental disorder or whether she was simply cold and calculating. The public, however, seemed to agree on one thing: she had betrayed her most sacred role as a mother. Even after her conviction, Veronica continued to change her story. In interviews from prison, she repeated her accusations against Andrea Stival, insisting he had been involved. Andrea sued her for defamation, and courts ruled in his favor, further discrediting her claims. For the family, the murder was not just the loss of Loris, but the destruction of their entire world. Andrea, once accused by his own daughter-in-law, spoke publicly about the pain of being falsely implicated while grieving for his grandson. Loris's father, Davide, divorced Veronica and focused on protecting their surviving younger son, who was placed in his custody. Psychologists later noted Veronica's troubled history, reports of strained family relationships, emotional instability, and difficulties in her marriage. But none of it could explain or justify the brutal murder of Loris. Today, Veronica Panarello remains in prison, continuing to proclaim her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. She has filed multiple appeals, all rejected. In prison interviews, she alternates between denying responsibility and blaming others, but has never expressed remorse for Loris's death. Instead of admitting guilt, she wove a web of deception that deepened the trauma for her family and community.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
No.
They're not breathing?
No.
Okay. And who was it we're talking about?
Lexi, she's 3.
She's 3. Bear with me. Okay.
In January 2018, emergency services in Warwickshire, England, received a call from 23-year-old Louise Porton. She reported that her 3-year-old daughter, Lexi, was struggling to breathe. Paramedics rushed the child to the hospital, but tragically, Lexi did not survive. Doctors initially noted the death as unexpected but unexplained. Louise appeared calm, almost indifferent. She didn't cry. Instead, she seemed detached, even as family members wept around her. Less than 3 weeks later, on February 1st, 2018, Louise dialed emergency services again. This time, it was for her younger daughter, 17-month-old Scarlett. She told paramedics the toddler had suddenly stopped breathing while in her car. Despite desperate attempts to revive her, Scarlett too was pronounced dead. 2 daughters, dead in the span of 18 days. The coincidence was too much for doctors and police to ignore. Suspicion immediately fell on Louise. Detectives began digging into her behavior in the days surrounding the deaths, and what they uncovered painted a chilling picture of a mother who saw her children not as lives to protect, but as obstacles to her personal freedom. Phone records revealed that Louise had been chatting with multiple men on dating apps just hours after Lexi's death. She sent flirty messages, exchanged suggestive photos, and even arranged meetings, all while her daughter's body lay in a hospital morgue. Internet searches on her phone were even more damning. Phrases like "ways to kill" and "can you die from having your head held down in water" appeared in her history. Investigators also found evidence that she had been researching methods of suffocation. Witnesses described Louise as someone more interested in her social life than her children. Neighbors recalled how she often locked the girls in a room while she went out, leaving them unattended for hours. She treated them as inconveniences, complaining that they got in the way of her lifestyle and relationships. One friend told police that Louise once joked she didn't want them anymore. Medical examinations of both Lexi and Scarlett revealed signs consistent with deliberate suffocation. There were no natural causes. The truth was clear. Louise Porton had murdered both her daughters. The prosecution argued that Louise killed her children because they were interfering with her sex life. In court, they described her as cold, manipulative, and self-absorbed. She saw motherhood not as a responsibility, but as a burden, and her actions were calculated to remove that burden permanently. The trial at Birmingham Crown Court in 2019 laid bare the shocking extent of Louise's indifference. Jurors were shown her text messages to men sent within hours of her daughter's deaths. They heard about her internet searches, her casual demeanor at the hospital, and her lack of grief at the funerals. Witnesses described her laughing and joking days after burying her children. Louise, for her part, denied everything. She claimed both Lexi and Scarlett had simply fallen ill. She insisted she was a caring mother and that investigators were twisting the facts against her. But her own digital footprint betrayed her. The evidence of premeditation, the searches, the timing, the patterns was overwhelming. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 2 counts of murder. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 32 years. He described her as calculated and deliberate, a mother who put your own needs before those of your children. Most killers try to hide remorse or guilt. Louise showed none. She appeared more concerned with her appearance in the courtroom than with the charges she faced. Newspapers branded her the Tinder killer mom, highlighting the contrast between her obsession with dating apps and her neglect of her children. Public reaction was visceral. Comment sections filled with fury at how a mother could sacrifice her daughters for nights out and fleeting male attention. In prison, Louise remains defiant. She continues to protest her innocence, filing appeals and claiming she is the victim of a miscarriage of justice. None of her appeals have succeeded. Today, Louise Porton remains one of the most infamous mothers in Britain's criminal history. She will not be eligible for release until she is in her mid-50s, and even then, public opinion may weigh heavily against her ever walking free. The story of Lexi and Scarlett is remembered as a brutal reminder of how selfishness can curdle into something deadly. In May 2007, police in the Czech town of Kurim made a discovery that horrified the country and soon captured headlines worldwide. What began with a simple baby monitor malfunction ended with the exposure of one of Europe's most disturbing child abuse cases, centered on a mother named Klara Maurova. Klara was a 32-year-old single mother, raising her two young sons, Andrei, then 8, and Jakub, 10. To neighbors, she appeared ordinary, quiet, devoted to her children, and involved in the local community. But what was happening behind closed doors was a nightmare no one could have imagined. The case came to light by pure chance. A neighbor was trying to connect his baby monitor when it unexpectedly picked up the signal from Clara's device. Instead of the expected sight of an infant, the screen showed naked Andrei chained in a dark, bare room, sobbing for help. Shocked, the neighbor immediately alerted police. When officers raided the Maurova home, they uncovered scenes of almost unimaginable cruelty. Andrei and Jakub were found locked in cages, their bodies bruised and scarred. They were emaciated, dirty, and terrified. Evidence showed they had been beaten, burned, and forced to endure ritualistic abuse for years. They told investigators they had been made to eat their own vomit, cut themselves with sharp objects, and were doused in cold water before being locked away. Initially, Klara claimed she was overwhelmed as a single mother and that she had lost control of discipline. But the investigation quickly revealed something far more sinister. She was not acting alone. She was part of a cult-like circle heavily influenced by a woman named Barbora Shklova. Barbora was a 33-year-old woman with a disturbing talent for deception. She had posed as a 13-year-old girl named Annika, complete with forged documents and a convincing childlike appearance. She manipulated Klara and her sister Katerina, convincing them she was vulnerable and needed care. But instead of being a child in need, Barbora was the ringleader of the abuse, encouraging the sisters to inflict torment on Andrei and Jakub as part of supposed discipline and spiritual cleansing. The extent of Barbora's deception became clear after the arrests. She had convinced Klara that harming the boys was necessary to rid them of evil, and that following her instructions would bring the family salvation. The abuse was not random, but ritualistic, rooted in bizarre beliefs tied to a shadowy religious sect known as the Grail movement. Investigators found evidence that cult members encouraged and justified the torture, reinforcing Klara's obedience to Barbora's demands. Court testimony later revealed the horrifying routine. They were kept in cages for hours, sometimes days, deprived of food and water. Barbora, disguised as Annika, would observe and direct the abuse, all while pretending to be another child living in the house. The case grew stranger when Barbora fled the country after her arrest. She resurfaced in Norway under a new disguise, this time pretending to be a teenage boy. She even enrolled in school and lived with unsuspecting foster parents, until her true identity was uncovered. Her ability to repeatedly deceive authorities and manipulate families added another surreal layer to an already nightmarish story. The trial of Klara, her sister Katerina, and Barbora in 2008 revealed the full scope of the crimes. Andrei and Jakub testified about years of abuse at the hands of their own mother and aunt, detailing the punishments and humiliation they endured. Their words, corroborated by medical reports and forensic evidence, painted a devastating picture. Klara broke down in court, claiming she had been brainwashed and manipulated by Barbora and the cult. She insisted she loved her children, but had been convinced she was helping them by inflicting the abuse. Psychologists described her as emotionally dependent and vulnerable to control, but prosecutors argued she still made the choice to participate in the torture of her sons. The verdicts outraged the public. Klara was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Her sister Katerina received 10. Barbora, who who masterminded much of the abuse, was given just 5 years. Several other cult members were also convicted. Many felt the sentences were shockingly lenient, considering the scale of the cruelty. For the boy's father, who was separated from Clara, the revelations were devastating. He had trusted his children to their mother's care, never suspecting the abuse taking place. After the trial, Andre and Jakub were placed in protective custody, shielded from media attention, as they began a long process of recovery. Reports indicated they struggled deeply with trauma, trust issues, and physical scars that would remain for life. The Kurim case remains infamous, not only for its brutality, but also for its bizarre layers of manipulation and deception. It wasn't just a story of domestic abuse. It was a story of cult influence, of a woman disguising herself as a child to control others, and of a mother betraying her own sons in the name of obedience to a twisted ideology. How could a neighbor's baby monitor be the first line of defense for children living in hellish conditions? How did social services and schools miss the signs of abuse for so long? The answers remain troubling. For the Czech Republic, the Kurim case shattered the illusion of safety in small communities. And for the rest of the world, it served as a disturbing reminder that sometimes the worst monsters don't lurk outside. They live inside the home, disguised as the very people children should trust most. On the night of November 2nd, 1997, police in San Marcos, California, were dispatched to what sounded like a domestic disturbance. A man had called 911 after a chilling phone conversation with his girlfriend. She told him she had just killed her 4 sons. When officers arrived at the suburban home, the sight inside would haunt them forever. In one bedroom, they found 14-year-old Brandon. In another, 7-year-old Austin, 6-year-old Brigham, and 4-year-old Matthew had all been shot execution style. Their mother, 33-year-old Susan Eubanks, lay on the floor with a gunshot wound to her stomach, an apparent suicide attempt. She was still alive. The boys were not. Investigators quickly pieced together the timeline of events. Earlier that day, Susan had a violent argument with her boyfriend, who left the home after hours of shouting. Fueled by rage, alcohol, and prescription pills, she retrieved a .38 caliber revolver. Instead of directing her anger at herself alone, she systematically killed all 4 of her sons. Reports showed she shot each boy in the head at close range. Brandon, the eldest, was likely killed first. The younger ones were found tucked into their beds, as if she had staged a macabre bedtime routine before pulling the trigger. Afterward, she turned the gun on herself, but her shot was not fatal. When police entered, she was semi-conscious, muttering that she wanted to die. The murder shocked the community and devastated the extended family. The boys were remembered as energetic and full of life. Brandon was a freshman in high school who loved skateboarding. Austin and Brigham were inseparable playmates, and Matthew was still in preschool. Vigils were held, their pictures framed with flowers and candles as neighbors struggled to make sense of what had happened. Prosecutors built a case around motive. They argued Susan killed her sons out of vengeance, against her boyfriend, against her ex-husband, and against life itself. Witnesses testified that she had repeatedly said things like, "If I can't have my kids, no one can." Friends recalled she often complained about being overwhelmed and unsupported, hinting that others would regret it if she snapped. The defense painted a different picture. They described a woman consumed by depression and addiction, raised in a violent home, and trapped in a cycle of abusive relationships. On the night of the killings, they said, she was intoxicated, emotionally shattered, and acting out of desperation. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Susan had spent hours drinking and brooding after her fight with her boyfriend. She retrieved the gun deliberately, walked into each room, and shot her sons one by one. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Susan herself. When questioned at the hospital, she told detectives she killed the boys to hurt her ex-husband and her boyfriend. She admitted she saw the children as pawns in her anger, These statements destroyed any chance of convincing jurors the killings were spontaneous or unintentional. In 1999, Susan was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. With special circumstances attached, multiple victims and premeditation, she was eligible for the death penalty. The jury agreed and sentenced her to death. She was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility, joining fewer than 24 women on California's death row. For years, the case faded from public attention, overshadowed by other notorious crimes. But in 2024, it returned to headlines when Susan's sentence was reduced. Due to California's moratorium on executions and legal appeals arguing against the fairness of death sentences, her punishment was changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The decision reignited anger among victims' relatives. For them, the death penalty had been a symbolic acknowledgement of the enormity of the crime. They said life in prison, while permanent, felt inadequate compared to the deliberate execution of 4 children. Susan herself has remained largely defiant. While she has acknowledged her substance abuse and depression, she has never taken full responsibility for her son's deaths. In interviews and legal filings, she has continued to cast herself as a victim of her circumstances rather than the sole cause of the tragedy. Susan Eubanks remains incarcerated, now serving life without parole. Her name is less well known than other infamous mothers, but the crime itself remains one of the deadliest examples of maternal violence in U.S. history. For many, the image of 4 young boys executed in their own home by the one person meant to protect them is proof of just how cold and destructive parental betrayal can be.
Je ne suis pas un monstre. Non. Je suis pas un monstre. Je suis une mère, je suis une grand-mère. Je suis pas un monstre.
In July 2010, police in northern France made a discovery that would expose one of the most disturbing maternal crimes in European history. The case began when a new couple moved into a house in the village of Villers-aux-Tertres, near Lille. While working in the garden, they stumbled across the skeletal remains of 2 tiny infants buried in the soil. Alarmed, they immediately called the authorities. Investigators quickly traced the property's previous occupants, Dominique Cottrez, a 45-year-old nurse's aide, and her husband. When police questioned Dominique, what she revealed shocked even veteran detectives. Calmly and without hesitation, she admitted she had killed not just the 2 babies found in the garden, but 6 more, spanning a period of nearly 2 decades. 8 newborns in total, delivered in secret and smothered immediately after birth. Forensic teams soon uncovered the evidence. Remains were hidden in plastic bags, stored in the garage, and buried in the garden. The pattern was always the same. Dominique concealed her pregnancies, gave birth in secret, and killed the infants moments after delivery. She told investigators that her motive was simple. She did not want more children and could not face the thought of using contraception or abortion. The revelations shocked the quiet farming village. Neighbors had long known the Cottrez family. Dominique was seen as a dutiful mother of 2 grown daughters, respected in her job as a home care nurse. There were no outward signs that she had carried out one of the worst serial femicide cases in French history. During questioning, Dominique confessed that her first killings had taken place in 1989. She continued the cycle until 2006, undetected for 17 years. Each time, she concealed her pregnancy by wearing loose clothing and avoiding doctors. Family and neighbors said they noticed nothing unusual, though some admitted they had quietly wondered about her weight fluctuations. Her explanation stunned the court. She said she killed the babies because she feared becoming pregnant by her father, who had abused her when she was young. Even in adulthood, she claimed that fear never left her. Though her husband and daughters lived in the same house, she insisted none of them knew. She carried the secret alone, burying it, along with her newborns. Psychological experts called to examine her said she did not fit the profile of a psychotic killer. Instead, they described a woman deeply repressed, controlled by trauma, and emotionally detached. Dominique herself admitted she felt no maternal instinct toward the babies, saying she never bonded with them. To her, each birth was something to be disposed of before anyone could find out. At trial in 2015, prosecutors argued the crimes were deliberate, repeated acts of murder. They emphasized the sheer scale: 8 children killed over nearly 2 decades, each one smothered immediately after birth. They said Dominique had opportunities to seek help, to use contraception, or to confide in someone, but chose instead to continue the cycle. The defense countered by pointing to her history of sexual abuse and her claimed fear of her father. They argued she was not a danger to society at large, that the killings were confined to this specific trauma-driven cycle. The court was faced with a paradox: 8 murders that would normally call for life imprisonment, but a defendant who presented as calm, cooperative, and non-violent outside the context of childbirth. In the end, the verdict stunned the public. Dominique Cottrez was sentenced to just 9 years in prison. The relatively light sentence was justified on the grounds of her psychological state and the belief that she was unlikely to reoffend. The reaction across France was outrage. Many saw the punishment as an insult to the memory of the infants. Commentators argued that the legal system had minimized the scale of the crime, reducing 8 deliberate killings to something closer to manslaughter. Feminist groups, religious leaders, and child protection advocates all condemned the decision, calling it a miscarriage of justice. The case forced France to confront uncomfortable questions. How could a woman hide 8 pregnancies from family, neighbors, and doctors? How could no one notice? And how could the justice system hand down such a lenient sentence for one of the worst known cases of maternal infanticide in Europe? Dominique served part of her sentence before being released. Her husband, who insisted he knew nothing about the killings, faced no charges. Their daughters, now adults, were left to reconcile their childhood memories of an ordinary mother with the revelations of what she had done in secret. On November 5th, 2001, 28-year-old Andrew Bagby was found dead in Keystone State Park, Pennsylvania. He'd been shot 5 times at close range, once in the face, once in the chest, once in the buttocks, and twice in the back of the head. The brutality of the murder shocked investigators, but the prime suspect shocked them even more. Andrew's ex-girlfriend, 40-year-old Canadian physician Shirley Turner. Shirley and Andrew's relationship had been unstable from the start. Friends described her as controlling and manipulative, prone to violent outbursts. Andrew tried to end things, but Shirley wouldn't let go. She stalked him, bombarded him with phone calls, and showed up uninvited to his work and social events. In the weeks before his death, Andrew confided to friends that he feared what she might do if he left her for good. The night before his murder, Andrew had agreed to meet Shirley one last time. Hours later, his body was found in the park. Police quickly tied her to the killing. She had recently purchased a .22 caliber pistol. Shell casings at the scene matched her weapon. Her cell phone records placed her traveling from Iowa, where she was working at the time, directly to Pennsylvania, and then back immediately after the shooting. By the time US authorities issued a warrant, Shirley had fled across the border to Newfoundland, Canada. As investigators prepared an extradition request, she revealed a bombshell. She was pregnant with Andrew's child. In July 2002, Shirley gave birth to a son, Zachary. For Andrew's grieving parents, Kate and David Bagby, Zachary was a living link to their murdered son, but he was also in the custody of the woman accused of killing him. The Bagbys immediately launched a custody battle, warning Canadian courts that Shirley was unstable and dangerous. During the proceedings, Shirley's disturbing history came to light. Former partners testified about stalking, harassment, and threats of violence. One ex said she threatened to kill herself if he left her. Another said she threatened to accuse him of assault. Medical colleagues described her as volatile and prone to sudden rages. But despite this long trail of red flags, Canadian courts allowed her to keep custody of Zachary. The reasoning was that Shirley had not yet been convicted. Extradition to the US dragged on through endless appeals, and while she awaited the process, she was granted bail multiple times. Conditions required her to surrender her passport and attend therapy, but she still retained full access to her son. Kate and David Bagby, desperate to protect Zachary, agreed to supervised visits with Shirley so they could spend time with their grandson. They later described the situation as torture, having to play nice with the woman they believed killed their son, all for the chance to be in Zachary's life. In August 2003, the worst fears became reality. Facing the possibility of extradition, Shirley made a final, devastating choice. On the morning of August 18th, he drugged Zachary with a lethal dose of Ativan, strapped him to her chest in a harness, and jumped off a fishing wharf in Conception Bay, Newfoundland. They both drowned. The murder suicide horrified Canada and the United States. For the Bagbys, it was the destruction of 2 generations in less than 2 years. David later said, "We warned everyone, we begged, and they didn't listen." The aftermath was explosive. Public outrage focused on the Canadian legal system, which had allowed Shirley to remain free, despite overwhelming evidence she had murdered Andrew. Investigations revealed she had a documented history of stalking and harassment, yet no one had considered her a serious threat to a child. The case became the subject of the acclaimed 2008 documentary Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. Directed by Andrew's childhood friend Kurt Quinney, the film began as a tribute to Andrew, but transformed into a chronicle of the custody battle and a scathing indictment of systemic failures. The film's shocking ending, Zachary's murder, left audiences around the world devastated and enraged. Shirley Turner's actions sparked legal reform. In 2005, Canada passed new legislation known as Bill C-464, or Zachary's Bill. It tightened bail restrictions for those accused of serious violent crimes, giving judges more power to detain defendants deemed a risk to children or the public. Lawmakers openly cited the Turner case as the reason for change. But for the Bagbys, reform was too late. They lost their son to Shirley's obsession and their grandson to her spite. They have since dedicated their lives to honoring Andrew and Zachary, speaking publicly about the failures that allowed Shirley to manipulate the system until the very end. What sets Shirley Turner apart from other mothers on this list is not just that she killed her child, but how she used motherhood itself as a weapon. She leveraged her pregnancy to avoid extradition, used Zachary as a shield in court, and when control slipped away, she chose to end his life rather than let him grow up without her. From the mother who staged a kidnapping to the one who manipulated custody battles, these stories show the darkest side of motherhood. They remind us that evil doesn't always come from strangers. It can come from the very person a child trusts most. These women shattered the most sacred bond of all, proving that betrayal can strike in the place it should be least expected. They are, without question, among the most evil mothers in history. If you found this exploration powerful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive. And let us know in the comments below, out of all these cases, which one shook you the most?